what it was. It wasn't an airplane. It was not an airplane. It was down off the road.
You're listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast with your hosts, Ash Ellis and Greg Tomlinson.
Hey Ash, how are you doing today?
Not too bad, not too bad. Battling a bit of a cough and a sore throat, so I'm maybe a bit quieter than usual this week. But yeah, not too bad. How about you?
Yeah, all right. I'm recovering slowly. 2 weeks post-op now. Yeah, be 2 weeks post-op by the time this goes out. So yeah.
Are you walking? Are you up and walking?
You saw me last night, so yes, I was walking.
I think we need some context to
yeah.
to say
So
you saw me last night.
yeah, so last night we done a TikTok live last week, and we were kindly joined by some people who were invited us to one of the UK's most haunted locations.
Mm-hmm.
So last night we ended up at my haunted hotel, the Old King's Head Hotel in Chester, in the northwest of the UK, where we spent the evening enjoying Jamie's birthday celebrations.
Yep.
But part of that was we rocked up and we done a paranormal investigation in the hotel, and it's the second time me and you have been together.
Yep.
First time was 18 months ago, and yeah, it wasn't quite as active as last time, but it did deliver on one of the rooms. We got quite a bit of knocking, some weird noises. So yeah, what did you think to it?
Definitely not as active, but just being in that building, it just has that weird vibe to it that as soon as you step through the doors, it's like we're somewhere that's definitely not normal.
Yeah,
it's just
it's
about
odd.
the fourth time I've been there, and it's just every time I go, I still get that same kind of excitement and stuff, thinking what could happen. It's after the first time, had so many things happen in that first time.
Yeah,
the next few times haven't lived up to it, but it's still
I know.
being there. We've the great bunch of people that invited us. Thanks to them for Jamie and Claire for inviting us to spend the night with them, as it were.
Yeah, as it were. Yeah. So that was super cool. Then we've had a mad day, and then we've got a mad couple of days, both of us. So I think we're both suffering from the paranormal hangover today.
Yeah, I got a flight in about 10 hours time. Or something
And
like that. So
you're off to Northern Ireland, aren't you? To Belfast.
Northern Ireland, yeah, for a few days. So
nice.
Forward to busy, like I say, busy week. It's been. I'm not feeling well, which is just annoying. But
have you got man flu?
We got man flu. Yeah.
So this week we are joined. We're very excited about this because we have been going backwards and forwards trying to secure our next guest on the podcast for some time. He is the host of a new podcast that's released called Obscurum, and I've been listening to the podcast since it launched. I won't give too much detail away right now as to what it's all about. I'll let him cover that off. But we are joined by someone, I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of Gabe before the contact. But since then, and listening to the podcast and looking at the website and the interesting story around Series 1, which I'll let him explain, I've been fascinated and gripped. Its high production values have been off the chart, and considering we just sit here on our microphones just chatting, I feel a little bit humbled and in awe of the production values that he clearly is putting into this. So we're joined by Gabe Lenners. Hi, Gabe. How are you?
I'm doing well. It is so great to be here with you both, finally. I know it's been a long time coming.
Yes. Yeah, it has. And I know we originally were going to speak, and then the podcast was pushed back a little bit. So I think I've built it up enough. Can you let us know what Obscurum series podcast is all about and what season 1 is all about, which is something that me and Ash have discussed multiple times over the last few months, and you'll understand why. And we've got our own take on what some of it is, but over to you.
Absolutely. I'm excited to hear your take too. and just to be here with you both. But Obscurum is this storytelling brand that kind of looks into mysteries in rural America. And Obscurum Invasion of the Drones is our very first season. It's a podcast series, which you can hear wherever you get your podcasts. And just to give you a little bit of background, so I live in Los Angeles, but I grew up in the middle part of the country. It's very rural, small towns, prairies, and I was actually going home from LA for New Year's, and I was sitting there with my family, and we get this knock at the door on around New Year's Eve, and it's this police officer who I had actually grown up with because I have this fascination with weather. I used to be a storm spotter and go chase storms, so I used to go chase storms with this police officer when I was really young. If there would be like any kind of severe weather in the area, and so he showed up at the house and he said, "Gabe, there's something strange happening in this county which we live in over people's farms." And he said there's all of these what people are describing as drones hovering over the farmland. And I didn't know what to think about it at that moment, but I got in my dad's pickup and drove out to the middle of nowhere from our small town, looked up into the sky, and saw all of these flashing lights hovering above the prairie. And over the next few days and weeks that would follow, people started to refer to these craft as drones. So in this podcast, I started asking questions to try to literally rule out different theories as to what might be happening and figure out what could possibly be in the sky and why, more importantly, over the homes of people I grew up with.
Yeah, so we have our take in in the UK about obviously everything that happens in the US because we are closely aligned, even though there's quite a distance. And it all started kicking off really in the news over here towards the end of last year, sort of summertime onwards, I think it was. Um, and it was like, is it UFOs in the term UFO? Or what is it? I'm fortunate enough that I live right next to sort of one of the UK's busiest military bases in Bryce Norton, and we I was off work, I think, sick or something, and Ash was like, "There's reports around by you," so I didn't see anything myself, but I think at that point we discussed the fact that it was just either hobbyists or nothing too nefarious. Um, but then it kept happening and happening, and we discussed it more. And my take on it was that I thought it was US government tech at that point,
Mhm.
because if it was adversarial tech, surely they would have shot it down. They wouldn't have allowed it to hover there. Certainly not days and days and days on the trot late at night, and people are obviously out shooting at it. I've seen people
Mhm.
shooting at these things. So
Yeah.
and then it's gone completely off the radar in the UK. Now it's not even a thing. But my take was that it was US tech or friendly tech. What did you think, Ash?
Yeah, I mean, these recent ones, I think I've had quite a lot of different opinions. Kind of as it's progressed and died down, we kind of thought that it would, where it kind of be a few months after the case, everyone's kind of not talking about it anymore. It's kind of interesting with your podcast, Gabe, because this is talking about the from 2019, kind of in Nebraska. That's the first time I'd heard of it was during your podcast. I hadn't heard of it before, whereas these ones that came last year is obviously worldwide news pretty much.
Hmm.
It's kind of like why these ones are not the ones from a few years ago are not as well known or were as well kind of in the media as much as them ones. So when you look at kind of the ones that you talk about in the podcast and the recent ones, what's kind of the similarities or differences between these two kind of flaps of drone or whatever you want to call them sightings?
Between the New Jersey kind of drone mystery and then the Colorado one.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So I was on the ground in New Jersey. We just wrapped up production actually on the first 9 episodes of this series, and I get this call, and this person's like, "Gabe, there are drones popping up over New Jersey now." And then, of course, it blew up into this big kind of wild story that we saw play out across the world, which definitely bordered on mass hysteria, at certain points. Uh, but from what I saw in Nebraska, when I went out at the very beginning and looked up into the night sky and saw these, different lights floating around, the similarities between that and some of the stuff I saw in New Jersey were there. And when you look at these drone incursions, and of course, you can't say what's connected or not. Is it the same thing or not? Because a lot of times when people look up into the night sky, I'm not a UFO expert. I'm not an aviation expert. I'm just a guy who went to tell this story because it came to me and asked questions. But it's very hard to justify what a light is in the sky, first of all. And then when you have everyone saying go outside, there's drones. I mean, just picture this. We have helicopters in the sky, we have hobbyist drones, we have airplanes, we have these mysterious drones, we probably have government drones if they're not our government looking at the other drones. And so it's kind of a circus in the sky. But what you can really conclusively say about, you know, these drone incursions, if you look at the timeline, you have Nebraska and Colorado 2019, 2020. You also have another incursion, which we briefly touch on in a later episode. I'm not sure if it's out yet, but another one in Nevada. And then in 2023, we see mysterious drones over Langley Air Force Base, which the Pentagon went on the record to talk about. So, once again, that was in December of 2023, just like the drones in Nebraska, Colorado started. Then 1 year later, we have the New Jersey things really start to ramp up again in December and early January. So what you can probably conclusively say is the time frame is very similar when people report these sightings on a large scale. So that's one of the biggest parallels that I noticed. And when I was out in New Jersey, I went out and chased these things with local law enforcement with their own drones to try to get close to these mysterious drones. And it was very hard to kind of do that. And we put up we put up police drones to try to get close. And so it was a very kind of wild scene, as you can imagine. But that's some of the parallels that I've learned in the podcast. This thing, I mean, you can imagine just started happening 5-6 years ago. And, I had no idea that the New Jersey thing would kick up in such a big way as it did. Yeah.
So, kind of just talk about drones for a second, because obviously the word drone can conjure up a lot of different kind of images. People may think of like a kid's £20 drone, and you got obviously multi-million military drones. What are the types of sizes, or what type of drone are we kind of talking about when we talk about these mysterious drones, just so people can kind of understand what we're talking about?
Yeah. That's a great question, by the way. When it comes to drones, the title of this is Obscurum Invasion of the Drones, but it's very clear and was clear early on that I couldn't conclusively say that what people were seeing was in fact drones, and I had to refer to them as lights in the sky. And we went with that for the title because that's what everyone's talking about them. But if in the first couple episodes, we kind of break down like what defines a drone. Can is drone the new name for UFO, or is UFO the new name for drone, or vice versa? And it's hard to say. What I can say is through the people I interviewed, and in my own sightings of seeing these things. And I'm a level-headed guy. I'm a I'm a journalist. I do a lot of other things. Like I'm not chasing UFOs. That's not my thing. But I can say some of these were the size of small cars, hovering over over land. And even if you think about it, and you have a consumer drone, like one that you would just buy at a store that's maybe a 2-foot drone, if you put that up at night, you're hardly going to see anything. I mean, these had to be big things for people to even be able to see, because at night your perception is skewed, distance is skewed, and you could still see. I mean, they look like aircrafts, above like 300-400 yards off the ground. So it was a very interesting kind of scene of events.
It was interesting that like you mentioned in the first couple of episodes, when you're talking to some of the locals from 2019 sort of sightings, that they were saying, one of them, I think, said that it was like when they zoomed in on their cameras and that there was like an orange body to it with bars going through it, which is completely weird. And I think that, if I remember rightly, that it was also like a mothership, or they appeared to be sort of like bits coming off of a main light, or like a drone. But it was interesting. One of the people said they'd much rather it be called a drone than anything else, and I think it normalizes what is quite an abnormal event. So I think probably people like the word drone because it humanizes it. So
Yeah.
it was strange to hear the different types, because they mentioned, like you just said, the size of cars, but then I think somebody mentioned about the size of a basketball. But one of the first sightings I know you spoke to a lady about, it was circling her house, and it appeared to be looking in windows as though sort of like almost like stalking them, which is terrifying if it's not. Well, it's
Yeah.
terrifying if it's US tech or friendly tech. Is even more terrifying if it's otherworldly, for want of a better
Oh,
phrase. So
yeah.
how did the locals take to it, especially when you started talking about it?
So in the podcast, I mean, the that's the thing. I've known. So I started with interviewing the people kind of that I grew up with and knew in the area, but I really broadened that out to talk to people in Northeast Colorado, which is in the center part of America, Northwest Kansas, which is also a neighboring state, and then Nebraska. And so a lot of these people didn't know each other, and they live in isolated rural areas, and they would describe a lot of things in the same way, and that's one of the things that got me. And in that first episode, you mentioned that lady. She was one of the first people who I heard of who'd had this drone encounter. And what's not in the podcast, but I'll tell you guys, and I haven't shared this with anyone, but like, it wasn't like she was just telling me like she experienced this and her husband chased it. The police were out there also trying to pursue these drones with that guy in the first episode and chase them themselves. And the police were like investigating this as it happened, like chasing these things. I mean, you can picture the police, you can picture a farmer driving down a road and then this outside of someone's house. So this was like a real tangible event that happened, that was being investigated, because whether you do think it's otherworldly or there's a criminal tie-in or something else, it's very unsettling to have things flying over your home and you don't know what they are. But one of the things that I learned is, we don't own the airspace, and so you own your home but you don't own the air above your home. And so it comes very unclear of like what people can actually do, in these situations, if they could in fact take the drone down. And that's one of the biggest things, in New Jersey too. There seemed to be a lot of confusion, on the ground of who has jurisdiction to do what. If these are in fact drones, what are they doing? Are they ours or are they not? And what can we actually do to mitigate the problem if we can confirm either way? And there's just a lot of kind of confusion in different levels of people that can take action through my reporting, it appeared.
Because one thing you mentioned where they kind of had this mass hysteria thing, definitely saw that. And in the UK, we had our own incidences above US Air Force bases at Lake and Heath and was it Bentwaters?
Yeah.
I think it actually predated New Jersey by like a week or something.
Yeah, I saw that. Things were really ramping up. Yeah.
It was, and like I said, the mass hysteria thing where suddenly, as a UFO investigator by my main kind of work, everything became UFO, like you said, where it's like a light in the sky that we'd usually maybe call a satellite or something was now a drone, or an airplane is now a drone. It's like it sort of became the buzzword where every single thing unidentified in the sky was now a drone. People were saying drone instead of using the term UFO for a month or so. And it's just really weird how it kind of just so quickly switched to a different meaning almost, just from this kind of bit of hysteria. And I just wanted to ask about one of the theories that I kind of liked, kind of think maybe explained it more to me, was that it was government or military, and they were searching for like a dirty bomb or dirty weapon, something like that. Whether they were looking for a live one or kind of doing the testing. See, this is how we would do it in a live situation, and they wanted to kind of trial it in the populated area to see how the public reacts. So when they do it, if it ever happened in real life, then they can kind of get to gauge how the public reacts. And I guess with it maybe happening first in rural areas where there's less people to see it, that could maybe add to that strength to that theory. Where trial it first in these rural places in middle America where none of this get much publicity, and now we're going to test it in probably the most densely populated area of New Jersey and New York. That's kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that theory, that it's the kind of looking for dirty bombs that kind of got some legs at the time.
Absolutely. Uh, you know, my kind of thought on that is, in I don't know how far you guys have gotten in the podcast, but in episode 4 is out. I interview a lot of different government officials in that episode, kind of as this was happening. I speak to, representatives at the FAA, Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and some other local law enforcement agencies in that episode, as well as a pilot who's a Delta pilot who kind of flew into the area a lot to kind of get a lot of perspectives. And, typically when I've encountered, people in the military in the past for other things, if and this is what's interesting with that theory. Typically, if the military, in my experience and my reporting, doesn't want something to be out there, or they would be testing something, they may say, "Oh, this is happening in the confines of the base. Of course, we test stuff," or "Of course, that's not ours." Wink, wink. And then they don't talk about it. But one of the things that kind of really stood out to me early on in this is that a lot of people, including the Air Force, including the FAA and other agencies, went on the record and said, these drones 100% do not belong to us, and we don't know who's flying them. So much so that the FAA and other agencies at the end of that episode, in episode 4, got a high-powered plane that's used to fight wildfires and took it out and were flying it back and forth throughout the area. And they, regardless of what you think about government transparency with UFOs, which it's not very good, as we know, in the past. But, they did do this, and I don't know why they would use their resources to go fly this plane around if they legitimately didn't know what it was. And so there's just a lot of questions with that theory. But I mean, based on the way that they moved in Colorado and Nebraska, they started in the western part of Nebraska and kind of tracked east over time. And people did describe them as flying in grids. But then you have the weird occurrences like the one in the first episode where this is outside of someone's home. So they would go up, they would come down. And so it was very interesting. But that's kind of some of my thinking on that. And I always go where the evidence is. And so if someone would have said like, we of course it's a government thing, like I probably would have thought that too, but it was just very appealing or very important early on to realize that they went on the record and said these are not our aircraft at all. So yeah, and you'll hear more about that. I won't spoil it for you, but I actually, since it is coming out, it's going to come out next week. I do go to an Air Force base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, on the base and interview the people on the base if they are in fact related to that. So you can kind of dive into that more, but it's interesting to kind of hear their perspective on the whole situation.
So kind of briefly going off, maybe off topic, not really off topic a little bit, but just maybe give us a bit more background about yourself, your past, maybe professional work, so we can sort of guide how you got kind of involved in doing this podcast based on your previous
Absolutely
work.
Yeah, this story came to me. Like I said, I am a broadcaster by trade. I loved film and TV and weather, like I said before. But I went to college at the University of Oklahoma to study TV weather, and eventually I moved out to Los Angeles and started to work in the entertainment industry and do a lot of hosting and reporting for different companies. Um, I was a host for Radio Disney and Radio Disney Country for the Walt Disney Company. And then I've done a lot of work with ABC News and CMT, and so I've always had this like itch to tell impactful stories, and I think storytelling is so important, even where we live today, in those things we go through today, because you you know you have so many resources, just like you guys have this amazing podcast. You have so many resources to tell your own story. And before, we didn't have all this technology, and we couldn't get on, this type of thing and do these long podcasts. And it's so accessible. And I think it's very important for people to, wherever they live, whether it's in the UK or in America, to, ask questions, and go out there and figure out and be curious about the world around them. But that's kind of how I got into this. And like I said, this just happened in my hometown, and I didn't go seeking out this story. It literally showed up at my front door.
So did you have any kind of previous interest in kind of UFOs or anything like unusual things before
I
this?
always, speaking of, of that, I've always had kind of an interest in a similar science, like I said, atmospheric sciences. So it's not like UFO, like um, it's kind of UFO adjacent, because I like looking at what happens in the sky and how different series of events like transform with like tornadoes and hurricanes and all of that stuff. So it's kind of the same like chasing aspect, where you go chase the weather and like look at the UFOs or mysterious sightings. And so, but this has definitely brought me into that conversation a lot more, and more than anything. And that's why I think it's so cool what you do with, with looking into UFOs is, I think it's very interesting, but I also think it's just important to know, like I said, what is flying above us at any given time, and why, you know, for any reason other than, we've seen all the things that have kind of happened with airplanes in the United States recently, and I just think it's very important to just know what people are flying, because things that fly have never also been so readily available to people, because you can go buy drones, and everything else. And I think there needs to be a better way to kind of, you know, make sure we're aware of all that.
So while storm chasing, um, do you ever see anything unusual? Kind of, 'cause we get a lot of reports where around storms or clouds or electrical storms, people also see strange lights and objects. Kind of, people say that they can get charged or get the energy from storms, electrical storms, stuff like that. Just wondering whether you had any or aware of any kind of UFO things that you'd seen, maybe whilst chasing storms, kind of bringing them two topics together.
I got to be honest. I have not personally. Now that doesn't mean there hasn't been strange things somewhere, because I've seen videos like you have of strange things around different weather events throughout the world, but I have never personally experienced that myself. Have you?
Not around the storm. But like I say, we because I run the biggest database in the UK for UFO sightings, and we get quite a lot that are based around different cloud formations and certain storms and stuff like that. And when big things happen, like for example, we've got the cyclone in Australia now that's causing quite a lot of nuisance. Let's say, we tend to see that we'll start seeing some kind of reports coming in around these big weather events. It's just kind of a strange kind of, like I say, a bit UFO adjacent, where sometimes they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. So yeah, that's cool. I was wondering whether you had any kind of personal. No, that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. But what's the craziest? I want to ask you now. Now I'm interested in this. Like, what's the craziest UFO sighting you've experienced?
Personally,
Yeah, have you?
um,
Have you?
only the one. Nothing too crazy. It was just, I say just. It was like a classic black triangle UFO. I was only 10 years old at the time, but a group of us kids and adults all saw it, and it just saw it in the 90s as well, when kind of black triangles were quite seen quite a lot across the US and the UK. And we just saw this black triangle, quite big, and just moved across the sky. Definitely wasn't a plane. Still to this day, not being able to properly explain what it saw, but that kind of kicked off the whole interest. But I'm still waiting 25 years later for the second sighting, despite going out there a lot and looking
Do
for
you
things.
have
I'm
like
mainly chasing other people's sightings. That's what I tend to do now.
now? Would you say that? Would you say that along with people calling these drones, and I'm interested in this now. Would you say that people have seen like more of the UFO type things around military bases outside of like just the drone sightings. Is that a typical place where you would go look and try to see that type of thing?
I'm kind of on the fence with this because it's a lot of people say like around bases, around nuclear sites, around and anything like that, you tend to see a lot of UFO sightings.
Hmm.
But on the flip side, you have a hell of a lot of UFO sightings that aren't around them areas. So it's kind of for me, they're kind of seen everywhere. There's nothing really in particular to really say, yeah, this is an area because we, as well as we're doing the database, because we have the biggest database in the UK, we do like trend analysis and data analysis, and we see where the hotspots are. We see what areas of the UK are seeing more sightings and other things, what types of things are being seen.
Hmm.
And over the years we've been doing it, we never kind of found the data to back up that they're seeing more around military bases or nuclear bases. They're seeing everywhere pretty much. Those some areas do have more sightings, and that's kind of we do see certain areas of the UK that do have more sightings year on year. Like
Hmm.
every year, kind of be the same areas popping up, but there's kind of not like there's any in particular bases in them areas or anything. It's just maybe it's places where there's less cities, things like that. Where there's more countryside rather than big cities in the UK. But for me, it's can be a popular, like I say, a popular theme that around nuclear and military bases there's more sightings, but there's a lot more that aren't near them places. So yeah, I'm on the kind
Interesting.
of on the flip side of both of them theories, I guess.
Got it. Because that's one of the things with these drones is, they have been reported over not just the ones I mentioned earlier, but they've been reported over military bases in California, Texas, Ohio, Langley, and so that's why I asked that question because I feel like that would be an interesting correlation.
Yeah, I
I
guess
think
on the flip side, sorry, Greg, is that in the UK our military's not kind of as active or as kind of um, busy as I guess the US is, or kind of we don't really have the funds like the America puts into it. So maybe it could be totally true in America, but I guess for the UK it's not. The ones unlike the ones we had, the drones we had last year were over US Air Force bases in the UK.
Hmm.
Wasn't even our own bases; it was your guys' ones in the UK. Make it even more interesting, I guess.
Yeah,
I think
that's
also
definitely
you've
interesting.
got the fact that if something's over a military base, it's more likely to get media traction than anything else, because that's slightly more scary that it's over a nuclear base than it is over, I don't know, a local shopping centre. Although they create a bit of media as well, but I
For
think
sure.
it's definitely the location provides probably the level of media attention it gets, because like I say 5 years ago and these drones were appearing in rural America, and we're not having the kind of media attention like we've recently had. And I
Mhm.
think as soon as it starts going over military bases, that's when people start sort of thinking that it could be more than it actually is. And like Ash said, the sightings, all the famous ones are over bases, but
Mhm.
the 95% of all the other sightings are not. So I think it's just purely the location. It's like if there was one over the White House, for example,
Yeah.
or another one over the White House, depending how you want to look at it, that would that would be that would stop the front pages all over the world, I think. So
Oh, I think so.
I think it's just that level. The location provides the level of media hysteria that
Mhm.
you'll get from it. It's interesting as well, going back to the rural America stuff. That I think you mentioned that the towns, they got like a couple of hundred people
Yeah.
in the town.
Some of
So
them.
these are very sparsely dense sort of places. There's hardly anybody out there, so that is a perfect cover probably to start testing some of this stuff. Um, but
Yeah.
what do they make of it out there? Because obviously there's, from what I get from the US and like the sort of middle America and the rural towns, that obviously there's a lot of guns in America, that the first port of call would be that those locals would just pick up a shotgun and try and defend themselves, quite rightly. And you mentioned it in the podcast that somebody gets them in their site. So how did the locals sort of initially react? Did they go out on like the offensive with weapons, or did they just go, "Wolf"?
Yeah, so if you look on the website obscurumseries.com, we have we have this one video which is at the very end of the trailer, and it's that guy that you mentioned with the box kind of thing that he said, and that is raw video which is edited into the trailer of him in his scope looking at this thing. And so you can see it kind of I mean, this is from the barrel of a gun, so you can see it kind of breaking apart. And so yeah, people were riled up. I mean, you can imagine. You know, there's it is very sparsely populated, but there are some pockets of some bigger towns of like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. Um, but yeah, people were more intrigued, I would say, in the first couple days, and then some people downright kind of scared, because you can imagine if you live on a farm in the middle of the night and you have something, you know, come close to your home and you don't have anyone there to protect yourself. So yeah, I mean, people were definitely talking about what they could do. You know, one of the things that was very interesting though is how fast that these drones were reported to be moving, as I mentioned, and how they could stay up for a long period of time. You would see kind of the same craft for hours on end, and it would be in the same area, and it wouldn't be charging anywhere. And you know, the winds meteorologically in the upper levels of the atmosphere were very strong, and it's a cold time of year, so cold would definitely impact batteries, but these drones would continue to stay up even in strong winds at night. So yeah, people were definitely unsettled. And while the big kind of wave of these happened in late December of 2019 and early 2020, I'm still talking to people there. I mean, I won't spoil the podcast, but I'm still talking to people there who are seeing these, just not in as big numbers. And so there's still been a lot of these quote unquote drone encounters happening in the same area. It's just not on as big of a scale as it was at the beginning.
There was one particular part, or it's in a couple of episodes, where there's a photograph that you get sent, the lady's got, where she talks about green goo. Can you
Yeah.
explain a bit more about that for everybody? I won't. I don't want
Yeah. You know
to
what?
say much more
The
than that,
first
but
three, it's okay. The first three episodes are out. We can just talk about it. But basically, one of the first things I heard when I got into looking into this mystery was that um, people kept telling me these craft are dropping things out of them, and I'm like, okay, is this Amazon, like, you know, dropping drones or flying drones, or is this like what is happening here? But this was 5 years ago, and if Amazon was pilot testing a program, they're not going to do it in the country where, you know, not a lot of people live, prop most likely. And so that really intrigued me, so much so that, you know, I was like, either this is the worst rumor I've ever heard, or there's some basis of truth to why people are saying this. And sure enough, um, there was a picture which I later, you know, saw, and it looked like this green mesh net bag with goo in it, and it looked frozen. And I saw that picture and I was like, could these things be dropping whatever this is? I mean, this looks like it's straight out of the show Stranger Things, and landing on, you know, country roads and stuff. Um, but as we get into that, and I actually find one of these and talk to the sheriff's department, who's who has these, it it kind of comes to light that this is actually an agricultural tool, and people were hysterical about it because it was it was showing up on county roads where the were under where the drones were being seen, and these were just laying on the road and they'd fallen off. And so that was one of the things I was able to debunk early on, but it definitely added a value of intrigue to the story. But it was a, you know, and that goes to say, along with like the actual, you know, UFO drone, whatever you want to call it, one of the most interesting things about like this whole thing is talking to people and hearing how they react to the unknown, because everyone reacts in a different way. And so it's been very very compelling to kind of dig into that as well as figuring out what and why may be actually happening.
I guess with that, and you mentioned you worked quite a bit with law enforcement, with the police and with the sheriffs, stuff like that, and talking to them, and they're investigating it literally as it's happening. I guess I imagine for them, they're there to protect the communities, especially the kind of the smaller ones. And I guess, I mean, I imagine they're gonna be thinking like, "What do I do with this?" Like, they're kind of. I'm just trying to think, kind of how they were reacting to it, and on a kind of professional level, where they're there to protect the community, but they got these unknown things coming above, and obviously, like you said, scaring some of the people as well. What it was like, kind of for them while all this was going on.
Yeah, I mean, they were just as confused as everyone else. I mean, one of the first reports out of the county where I live was they reported like 40 or 50 of these, and it wasn't people, it was law enforcement that was out there looking at these things. And from the people I've talked to, what they did was is they could take the reports down and, kind of relay that information up the chain to the federal level. But you're kind of between a rock and a hard place when that happens because by the time you've reported it, it's gone, and they're like, well, where did it happen? And so there's not a lot that can be done in that regard as far as figuring that out. But you know they were a little hesitant at first, but then they became more invested and more infested. And I'm still talking to a lot of local law enforcement people as well that are, yeah, that have still had reports of people who live there that are seeing drones. And so they're still, yeah, they're still in the area, and but they were really involved with trying to get to the bottom of it too. I mean, everyone wanted to figure it out, and try to see.
I think one of the start again. One of the unsettling things, apart from the fact that they were circling around and appeared to be looking in people's houses, is that, like you mentioned, that it was happening at the same time of year, but also at the same time in the evening. So at dusk, these lights would appear till about, I think you said about 10 p.m. ish. But some of the witnesses were saying that the lights would go out and they would drop down, so they could essentially go undetected at a lot lower level, which obviously shows there's intelligence either on the craft itself or remotely. Um, After listening to all of these reports, the law enforcement, what's your take on it? What do you think it is?
I think that, you know, after looking into that, I think that honestly, I'll say I don't know, but I have been able to rule out a lot of different things. I don't think it's related to agriculture, number one, because a lot of times, I don't know if you're aware of this, but people use drones for spraying crops and different things. I'm fairly confident it's not that. And I think more than figuring out like the what for me now is just to, and this is why I put out this podcast, to be totally honest. I think it's very important for everyone to know what's happening. And this is kind of me just documenting this event, but I really hope that more information comes to light and I can dig into with this to try to actually figure out what it is. But like I said early on, you can also draw some conclusions from talking to the public officials I did. Sure, there could be black ops groups and different things that may be flying things that even those people aren't aware of, but it's very interesting that, you know, so many people went on the record and went out of their way to say these aren't ours, which just typically doesn't happen. They just don't talk about it and say like they just won't respond. It's like of course it's them. They're just not saying anything. But you kind of saw that in New Jersey too, which was very interesting. Where early on, I mean, you have the DoD, the FBI, the FAA issue a joint statement saying, we've received 5,000 drone reports. 100 of them are legitimate. We've looked into them, and then they kind of drew their conclusions. But they're they're at least acknowledging what people are. Uh, they're acknowledging what people are saying they're seeing, and they're not just like not commenting at all on the situation, and they've poured government resources into trying to get answers. And so you have to dial it back and be like, well, if there is a big mass drone event, something strange is actually happening here, would our government agencies be pouring tons of money into trying to figure out what it is just to cover for it? And I mean, it seems like it doesn't make that much sense to me. So you can kind of, think about it in that way. But then, also it's just important to keep going where the story leads and keep talking to people. And I mean, like I said, I just think that's what I really want people to get out of this. And there's probably, multiple things happening at the same time. I mean, like I said, because you're seeing these drones, people, there's aircrafts, there's stars, there's helicopters, there's other people's drones, there's Starlink mixed into the picture. We all know what Starlink looks like, but there's just a lot of stuff happening, probably more than ever before. UFOs, UAPs, like the fighter pilots have captured, happening in the sky at the same time. I would be, you know, I would go on the record as saying I think it's probably the most busy the sky has ever been in the history of the sky. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you guys can weigh in on that. I mean, what do you think?
It's interesting because I was discussing, we would we had like a round table of UFO um, podcasts and enthusiasts with us,
Hmm.
and I talked. There's actually a book called The Brain Trust by a guy called Colin Kelleher. He worked as one of the research leads at Skinwalker Ranch for Robert Bigelow's company with the National Institute of Discovery Science when it all started kicking off at Skinwalker Ranch with the UAPs and the paranormal stuff.
Hmm.
And part of his book talks about cattle mutilations during um, BSE and mad cow disease when that was all a thing in sort of the 90s, and that they were using these cattle mutilations and the fact that these UAPs were coming down and taking cattle, mutilating them, and then dropping them back off again as cover for military operations to see how far um, mad cow disease and BSE had progressed through the wildlife of the US. So they were actually doing black ops, helicopter drop downs in the middle of the night, picking up cattle and other wildlife, testing them, and then just dropping them back off under the cover of this UAP phenomena that was happening at the time. So there is a good shout that all of this happening recently is a black ops under the cover of this drone flap over the last few years, and it is military, but they're saying it's not because it's so far under the radar and so black of an operation that nobody really knows about it. And we know in the UK and the US that the military and defense budgets, they've got these black budgets that have got billions and billions of dollars pumped into it. Nobody really knows where the money goes.
Hmm.
Who's to say it could be US or allied military tech being developed under the guise of UAPs, for example, because it's perfect. It's credible enough of a story that you could go, wow, there's these strange lights in the sky that nobody really knows what they're all about. But there is a branch of the military that knows what's going on. So my take from it really is it could well still be a black ops,
Hmm.
but because it's such black ops and under the radar, that everybody can deny it right the way
Yeah.
up. And like Biden didn't really know what was going on anyway towards the end, but he they kind of just said it's nothing to worry about, and it's just like what the, how I don't even know how you could even say that, even if you knew what it was. Surely it's something to be worried about.
Yeah.
So it could well be black ops for all we know, under the guise of this weird phenomena that is actually happening and scaring people, but it's
Hmm.
perfect.
Yeah. I mean, you make a great point. I mean, it's important to look at all sides and try to
Mm,
figure out the best that you can. But I mean,
mm,
that's definitely, a possibility. And one of the things too is you just you have to be very careful not to connect the two, because
mhm,
I mean you can, or even with Langley, because you really don't know, but it is very curious that these things happen around the same time.
Yeah, yeah. It's very
So
strange, and it's it's a topic that we had discussed, like we mentioned, we've discussed on the podcast over the last few months as it was all developing,
yeah,
and it became a bit of almost a thing that we said we were never going to mention the drones again, and then the next episode we'd mention the drones. So it's become this thing, and up until discovering the podcast of yours, like Ash said, I didn't know that it happened this far in the past. I thought it was I knew about the Langley stuff, but not that much further back. So
yeah,
it's really fascinating, and I don't know what to make of it, to be fair. The more I listened to each episode, I'm like, I thought it might be some government surveillance thing, or
hmm
or somebody just playing a prank at the start. You could almost go down there, but drone tech back then, like you mentioned, you can't buy that stuff off the shelf,
no, and
not
you
with a
can,
battery life of hours and hours and hours.
yeah, and you can. I don't know how far you guys have gotten in the podcast, but there, as you get later on, there is, a man who we changed his name to kind of protect his privacy, but he was being looked at as being involved in this, which is very interesting, and the FAA was interested in him, and so when you dial it back though and think about it, it would be very hard and unconceivable for one person or team to operate this many drones as were being reported, or aircraft at the same time, because it wasn't like they were popping up one place and then someone else would see them in another place. It was happening simultaneously throughout the whole thing. So they were being seen in a lot of places at once.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess kind of on a level pegging with Greg. I mean, as a kind of UFO enthusiast, investigator, whatever you want to call it, we want that story. We want to have this thing happen that kind of throws UFOs, I guess, more into the mainstream. It's been an uphill battle for decades, the ridicule and stigma and stuff of being able to talk about this stuff like openly and publicly. And whatever the drones are, for them kind of weeks and month and a half, or however long it was when it was all like fever pitch, everybody was talking about it. And I was getting asked at work about it and stuff. And like, no one ever at work talks to me about UFOs. It's kind of like, oh, he's the crazy guy that like investigates ghosts and stuff. And they were like, oh, you see this about the drones? What do you make of this? What do you make of that? And he kind of opened it up to the public,
Yeah.
quite more accessible. So I guess whatever it ends up to be, if we ever find out what it's going to be, maybe it has helped the topic in general, help put the conversation a bit more. More people are talking about it, which is what we need. It's just more people talking about it, more podcasts like yours and ours and other ones that pop up from time to time. Just get that conversation going. And it for a few weeks back then, last year, start of this year, it was the topic of the day. It was like everybody in the country seemed to be talking about it, and that was like, as someone who does this day to day, kind of in the background. It was, I guess, great to see that kind of like, I told you, I told you these things are real. Like more people maybe going to start believing now. So yeah, I guess for me that's my end take from the whole thing.
Yeah, and with UFOs, I mean, you're, like I said, you're the expert, but I mean, there's been documented military evidence of UFOs all across the world. I mean, these are people who are highly decorated officials who have noticed things that aren't supposed to be there, and I do think that, like I said, aside from the drones, it's just important to know what's in the airspace, I think.
Definitely. I guess one final thing for me I wanted to mention,
Mm-hmm.
kind of looking into the podcast a little bit on the, like say Greg said, the production value of it is incredible. There's some couple of names that I saw that I was like, oh wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, so you got executive producer, you got Ron Howard and my God, Brian Grazer involved in it. I was like, these are Hollywood heavyweights, pretty much.
Yeah,
I guess that leads towards the production value as well, I guess, a little bit. Kind of talk about that, having them two involved.
Yeah, it's been a huge blessing to be able to work with the Imagine team. They've just helped. They're known for their shows like Apollo 13 and Friday Night Lights and A Beautiful Mind, and to have that power and that storytelling history behind you on so many levels has just been amazing. But they first kind of became aware of the podcast. I had a few meetings with them, and they wanted to be on board, and then iHeart came together, and it really has just been a great relationship to just see how we can all come together to really get this out there, because it does take it takes a huge group of people to kind of you know get this all produced and put out. And I'm just excited. Hopefully, like I said, we'll have more episodes looking into New Jersey, because I captured a whole large group of content. Like when I was out there, I interviewed a lot of people, and so we kind of have a behind the scenes of what's happening or what happened in New Jersey. And I think that season may actually even be more compelling than this one, based on some of the people who are in it. And I'm excited, hopefully, for you to hear that in the future too.
Definitely, that's amazing. And for you, does this make you kind of in the future want to go more down this kind of the high strangeness, the weird things, kind of on a career path? I guess, is that something that you would be more open to after doing this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. Like I said, I think it's just important to have conversations about a lot of these topics, because things are happening. And like I said, you need to be an engaged citizen and ask questions about the world around you. And a lot of times, in these more rural areas where people live, a lot of stuff goes unreported. And I think, it's very important to kind of look into some of those stories that may not be covered as much by the mainstream media, to really dig into those, because they're just as important as the ones we see every day. So, yeah, I can definitely see myself going in that direction.
Amazing. I think that's it from me, Greg.
No, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and it'd be good to get back on once all the season 1 episodes have been released. And I think, like you mentioned, I think there's one coming out on March the 11th. Very special day for me as well. That's my
Happy
birthday.
Greg.
Yeah, happy
Oh,
birthday.
okay. Well, hey, that's awesome.
There we
Happy
go.
birthday.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, it'll be good to maybe get you back on after the full season
Let's
has
do it.
aired.
So
So then we can have a wrap up of, we've sort of had the conversation up to now, and then conclusions at the end would be amazing. So yeah, it'd be great to get you back on.
Let's do it.
So where
would
can
love
people
to.
find you? Where can people find you?
So you can search Obscurum Invasion of the Drones wherever you get your podcasts. If you do listen on Apple, obviously you guys know, on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, please rate, leave us a comment, tell us what you think, because some of your comments actually are things that I'll probably look into, because there's been some interesting comments that people who have listened have written there. And then you can also find more about the podcast, more videos, behind the scenes content at obscurumseries.com. That's where it's all at.
Fabulous.
Amazing. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And yeah, we'll get you back on as soon as the season finishes, and we'll do a full wrap up. That'd be amazing.
Let's do it. I would love
Cool.
that. I would love that. This has been great. Thank you guys for staying up late.
Yeah, that's all right. No, we're used to the late nights. We interview a lot of people in America, so I was Googling the times, and I was just like, oh God, what time is it?
Yeah.
What time is it there? Is it here? Because we've had it before where, like, we have British summertime starts at the end of March, so we go forward an hour, and then the times just don't change as fast in the US. And we've had times where we've been an hour early for a podcast, and we're like, God, where is
It's
the
so
person?
hard.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
Thanks for Google, though.
Yeah, thanks for Google. And I'm on the far side of the country, so it's super big time difference.
So it'll be interesting to listen to the Nevada stuff, because I've been out to Area 51 twice.
Okay.
When I've been out to Vegas. So unfortunately, didn't see anything weird, but maybe again in the future.
Maybe you will. Maybe you will in the future. Yeah, you need to road trip out in the desert.
We keep talking about we've actually written a book. We wrote a book and every chapter is a different state in the US.
Oh, no way.
With
I'm
a
gonna have to
weird.
check that out.
I'll
What's the
send
book
you the
called?
link. We'll send you a link and whatnot. That's called Paranormal United States. It is.
Okay.
We done a whole 52. Well, 52.
50.
What am I? 50. Why I said 52? We done it over the course of a year. That's where I got the 52 from. Sorry. And we every week we done a different state, and then we serialized it in like a book companion and that, didn't we, Ash? And that's a couple of years
Oh,
ago now.
cool.
So yeah.
I'm gonna have
So
to check that out for sure. Yeah, send that over to me.
yeah.
It's great talking with you guys too, and go get some sleep, and we'll talk soon. All right.
Yeah. Nice one. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal, title music created by Steve Yarwood and Ambiinfinity. If you like the show, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, X, and Instagram. And if you really like the show, please rate and review the show wherever you are listening. It really does help. See you next time, and until then, stay weird.